By cognitive approaches, we are talking here about cognitive-based coaching, often shortened to CBC, to distinguish it from CBT, or the better known cognitive behavior therapy. We're actually talking here about how thoughts influence feelings and behavior. Now, let's just look at what we mean by feelings. Feelings is a word we use quite liberally in English, and here it includes emotions or physical sensations. But when we consider these using a model called the space model, we look at them separately. And to distinguish it, rather than saying feelings, we mention and look at emotions separately from physical effects. Now, cognitive behavior coaching can be very useful, but it doesn't magic away problems. And it needs a bit of effort from the clients, but the key thing that it does is it helps them to manage their thought processes. Now, some people might think that actually thoughts are not manageable, but all the research shows that actually we can have some influence over our thoughts. They are, in fact, our thoughts. And these thoughts are sometimes unhelpful thoughts, often referred to as flawed thinking. And the emotions and physical effects that get in the way of our goals can be traced back to some kind of flawed thinking. So what do we mean by flawed thinking? Let's look at some examples. All or nothing thinking, evaluating experiences extremes, and whether good or bad, always late, never works, nothing we do has ever had any impact on this. That's an example of all or nothing. Magnification or awfulizing, it's a disaster. People often say that, it's a complete mess. Usually it is not a complete disaster, and something has gone wrong, but it's not a complete mess. Minimization is the other side of that, actually completely playing down the positives. And when people are feeling low, this is something they tend to do all the time. They minimize their own contribution. Taking things personally. And we've got an example here. I'm responsible for everything. So we're also got all or nothing and magnification there. Now this is an important one. Emotional reasoning. Mistaking thoughts and feelings for facts and not the hypothesis they may be. I feel like a failure, therefore I am one. I feel so nervous. I know this presentation will fall apart. Well, this is something you can bring to come to be, a self-fulfilling prophecy in colloquial language. Mind reading. This is about extrapolating what is going to happen in the future. We can't know what's going to happen in the future. There's a range of possibilities, but we can disturb ourselves by jumping to these conclusions. Labeling, particularly of others or ourselves, they are always unhelpful. I always get these sorts of tasks wrong. I can never do, I'm useless at selling. All of these things can be unhelpful. And they're not talking about facts, they're labeling. Minimization is linked to discounting the positive, saying reframing anything positive as unimportant, or coming up, mind reading, actually reasons behind the positives. And this mental filter thing about where we only see the negative, this is often the outcome of many of these others. Demands is an unhelpful one. Peppering your thoughts with rigid and unflexible statements or thoughts such as shoulds and must. And the example there, I should have predicted that was going to happen. He must have known how much that would have hurt. These are demands that are often impossible to live up to. Fortune telling, catastrophizing. Again, this is exaggerating negative impacts. Low frustration levels, or I can't stand it. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I can't stand this. This is an example of flawed thinking. Very common one, phonyism. This sort of feeling of self-doubt that you have got to where you are by some kind of fluke, and that you're at any time about to be found out. A big source of anxiety and stress. Blame, not taking responsibility, blaming somebody else or something else, abdicating responsibility. It's all their fault. They should have recruited an extra person. Often linked with statements like, "There's nothing I can do about it." So you may recognize some of these. So an exercise that you could do if you have an opportunity in pairs is to look through this list and identify thinking errors which you have experienced. And we tend to all experience them one way or another. And identify an example to feed back to your partner and reflect on the impact of this distorted thought on your feelings or your emotions, your behaviors and actions, your physiology or physical signs, body changes. So, and what was going on in the social context? What was happening at the time? That could be the impact that was on you or the impact you were having on others. Now, underpinning all of this is the idea that these thoughts come from our core beliefs or assumptions, which we've internalized. And so they're so internalized, we don't recognize them anymore. We just see what they produce. So some of these thinking errors may be when people talk about somebody having a victim mentality, that would be a core belief that they have, is that they're unlucky, everything happens to them, and so they see everything through that lens, and that can produce many of these unhelpful thoughts. And challenging some of these things can be quite difficult for people. So great sensitivity is needed, and this means it has to take time. And this is why it's not a quick fix. But when you really get to a troublesome belief and people recognize it can take control of it, there is a huge payback. So it's well worth the effort. So we've got a number of strategies for dealing with thinking errors. A classic one is writing them down. Just seeing them written down often actually helps people to take a more objective view on them. What's happening here is we're moving the processing of this into the cognitive part of the brain, where people can deal with it. It gives you a chance to turn these into positives. Check the facts. Filter out the fiction. Then there's also befriend yourself. This is where you can actually think of, if this was a colleague, then what a friend, would you be so hard on them? Here we're talking about managing your internal critic. Relative thinking gives you an opportunity to take less extreme views. Find the middle ground. Look for the evidence. Is this a fact or is this a fiction? Get rid of these labels, and especially when they are extreme labels. Get rid of the musts, shoulds and oughts. Cool your thinking. Broaden the picture. When you feel you're totally responsible for a situation or problem, write a list of all the other aspects involved. To ride the unhelpful thought, somebody I have supervised talked about, when they put the give it a silly voice. So it sounds, when they hear this inside them, they give it a silly voice, and that actually gets rid of it. Or it doesn't get rid of it, but it makes it less powerful. So these are a number of strategies, and the model we use to look at this is the space model, and we'll deal with that in another clip.